Hi, I'm Steve Morrison. I'm really glad that you've joined me for the next quarter of an hour or so talking about the topic of grief. What a huge topic to talk about, and in church life we deal with it all the time. As ministers, we often sit with families who are going through some of the darkest days, the deepest valleys of their life. Psalm 31 verse 9 says, "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, and my soul and my body also." You know, you can really hear the depth of that call that the psalmist has written. And that's often what grief is like. Loss and grief is an intrinsic part of life. So what is grief? Well, it's normal and it's natural. It's inevitable. It's universal and unique. But loss equals change. And change causes life disorientation. And grief is about readjusting to change. It's change that often is at multiple levels. And it's about re-establishing meaning and purpose, and often it's healing that comes through the pain of grief. You know, traditionally loss and grief are associated with death, and that's true. But there's a lot of other areas as well. It's a broader concept than just death. Loss refers to being deprived of or ceasing to have something that one formerly possessed or to which one was attached. And that could be identity or career or your country and culture and so many things that we wish we still have that sometimes we lose. Grief and grieving, it arises as a result or as a reaction to loss. Specifically, grief can be defined as the psychic energy that results from tension created by an individual's strong desire to firstly maintain his or her assumptive or accepted as real world as it was before. It's to accommodate to a newly emerging reality resulting from the loss. It incorporates the new reality into, I guess, an emerging world that one must learn to live in. Grief is the conflict between the world that was, what it cannot be, and how it may become. And this creates the tension that engenders grief. And we carry grief. Grief is a weight that we feel. You'll often see people when they talk about the loss and they'll hold their chest. We carry it. Two patterns of grieving. I want to talk about them. Intuitive and instrumental. Intuitive grievers are more likely to experience their grief as waves of affect or emotion, and instrumental grievers are more likely to describe it in ways of physical or cognitive terms. Whereas an intuitive griever often needs to express their feelings and seek support from others, instrumental grievers are more likely to immerse themselves in activity. They want to fix things. When it comes to instrumental and intuitive, I want to give you an illustration. As a minister, you know, I've sat in a hospital room many times when someone's passed away. And it's interesting because you can see the two types of grievers. One will sit in the corner and be silent or cry and just want to be, or perhaps hold somebody else. When the other one, the instrumental one, they want to fix things. They want to sort things. They want to get things organized and ready. And what are we going to do about this? And what are we going to do about that? And you can see the two really clearly in those experiences. Individuals experience a wide range of responses, and they can include things like sadness and anger, guilt and jealousy, anxiety and fear, shame, feelings of powerlessness or hopelessness, even relief, depending on the circumstances. And then there's the spirituality side. And the spirituality, we're broadly defining it as the way people seek to understand in the purpose of life, the meaning of life. These belief systems may be around religious tenets or other philosophical frameworks. And they help someone try to explain life and death. And often they're profoundly challenged at the time of a loss. I often call it a crisis of faith. You know what it's like. If God was really all powerful, he would never have let my wife die. You know, if God was as loving as you say he is, Steve, how could have my child ever passed away? And so there comes a crisis of faith. Even to the most seasoned believer can come to that place of crisis. And so this reconstruction of meaning in the face of loss becomes a really critical aspect for the griever's experience. It was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who spoke of the 5 stages of grief, and there's been a lot of talk in the recent decades about how it's not right and is right, but I've seen it as really helpful to a lot of people, and that idea of the denial, and then people go into anger, and then there's this bargaining. God, if you bring them back, I'll do everything for you. I'll never swear again, whatever it might be. And often there's depression, and then finally it's the thought of acceptance. And while they're not linear like that, they go around the place and swap and change. The fact is we really do see those stages that people go through. And then culturally, things are really different as well. In some cultures, it's so important that it's loud and wailing, and it's an incredibly important part of the grieving experience. And yet in other cultures, that would be frowned upon because things are to be silent. You're not meant to awaken. You're not meant to upset the spirits or whatever it is. And so we see not only is there the issues of spirituality, but there's issues of culture. I found that grief and loss brings out the extremes. It brings out the best and the worst of people. So what does grief look like? Well, it's feelings and thoughts, it's physical reactions, it's behaviours. There are really strong factors that affect the way we grieve. One is the nature of the relationship or the attachment you had with the person who's deceased. The mode of death can play a really big part. Social supports and personal grieving styles, and of course, previous losses. They all impact the way people grieve. So the task of grief can be remembered by the acronym TEAR, T-E-A-R. It's to accept the loss. It's to experience the pain. It's to adjust to the new event, and it's to reinvest into the new reality. And as ministers, we have the privilege of helping people through that. I remember speaking at a Bible college, and I was on a different topic actually, and then somehow we got onto grief, and they said, Steve, if there was just a couple of things you could give to us, what would it be? And I remember coining this phrase. I would go with the 3 H's. And so I want to tell you what they are. The first H is hang around. And when I say hang around, I don't mean get in the way. But hang around is depending on the person. If it was me, I would want you to hang around. I want you to talk to me and to listen to me. And I might retell the story 100 times and I want that to be okay. But if it was my wife, she would want you to drop the casserole off and keep going, because we're really different like that. So hang around means be available. The second is hug. And if they're a huggy person, then I think give them a hug. I think physical touch like that can be important. But I think what I really mean by hug is be prepared to step into somebody else's world. Be prepared to step into their pain. Be okay with the fact that it could be messy, and that's okay. Just be prepared to step in. And the third one is hush. Just be quiet. There's nothing you can say that's going to fix it. There's nothing you can say that will remove it. There's nothing. Maybe you can say, I love you, I'm here for you. I wouldn't even say I understand or anything like that. I would go right down the line of as little words as possible. So what are some tips that help? We need to validate the person's feelings, normalize the experience, allow telling and retelling of the story. Be mindful of significant dates. Oh, it's so important. Be natural and be yourself, and practically help. Often it's so appreciated. So what would you expect when someone's grieving? Well, I would say expect the unexpected. There's no rules to this. Expect irrational thoughts and negativity and gloom, isolation, withdrawal, anger, guilty, the what if questions. Expect laughter and fun, and who knows? There's no right or wrong. And then there's things to avoid. Don't try to rescue. Don't use cliches. Don't over-spiritualize. Don't judge or have expectations. Don't tell them how they should feel. Avoid saying, I know how you feel. And again, don't say too much. Some tips I would give you would be this. Be fully present. Listen with your heart. Emphasize or empathize with the feelings rather than content. It doesn't really matter what they say. Listen to what they're saying from their heart. And remember, it's not about you. And it's not about your stories. It's about the person grieving. I've found over, nearly 3 decades of working in the funeral industry as well as pastoring and chaplaincy, that the gifts of grief can be self-discovery, having to learn to do things differently. It can be new beginnings that they never thought possible. There's new opportunities that come as a result of grief. I've seen it over and over again. There's an increased empathy for others. There's a deeper appreciation for the things that we have. Relationships with others become more important and more potent. And I've seen time and time again, after the crisis of faith has settled, there is a deepness and a closeness and a relationship with Christ that was never there before. Friends, it's hard to say, and you wouldn't say it at the beginning, but down the track, there are often so many gifts that come from grief. Matthew chapter 5 verse 4 says this: Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I'm thankful for the Holy Ghost, who is the great comforter. He is the great counselor. And he says to you and me, I'm there with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. He wraps his arms around us and he holds us tight. No matter what we've ever done or ever said or ever thought, he is there for us. His arms are wide open. He says, run into my arms. I think the best thing we can do for a grieving person is point them to Christ and say, run into his arms. Yes, the sadness will be there. Yes, the desperate want for that relationship to return will be there. But there is something supernatural and almost unexplainable that takes place when we're willing to open our heart and say, God, I need you more than ever before. Christ transforms lives, and he uses you and I to help people do that. If I can help you, please send me an email, steve@stevemorrisoncoaching.com. You can go onto my website, stevemorrisoncoaching.com. And down below there's a free ebook, and I've even put in there a 50% off my online course, which goes through this 10 really practical things to do when you're stuck in grief. We're meant to go through sadness and we go through all of that, but when we're paralyzed, when we can't go into life, when we can't face the world, when we can't leave our house, this is called complicated grief, and it needs to be sorted out. So please get help and support for that. I hope this has helped you. God bless you richly.